Well, again, thanks everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time and your interest in this proposal. So we're thrilled to be doing this work. We've had done some initial planning work with Evolve and HDR, looking at some of the locations for these structures. Had pretty ample conversation with PennDOT, with Alcosan, who own property on the landings at either side of the bridge, with Domi and others, thinking about how we connect to and improve the experience on and around the West End Bridge. So this is a really essential part of our overall strategic plan to complete the loop in the next 10 years. That's 15 miles of trail and open space from the West End Bridge, the most critical gap in the system, up to 31st Street on the Allegheny and down to the Hot Metal Bridge on the Monongahela. I'm going to let Maria go through a brief presentation about the project, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions, which we will do our best to answer today and then document and share out as well. All of this information, including the recording, will be posted on our website for those who couldn't make it today as well. So thanks again, and why don't you take it away, Maria?
All right. I'm sort of going to briefly go through the pre-planning information that we included as Appendix C in the proposal. So let me share my screen. That would help. All right. Can you see that? You seeing it, Gavin?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So as Gavin mentioned, this is a key project in our completing the loop plan. Basically, we've have these 3 rooms. Sorry, my cursor is jumping around. The Allegheny River Room, the Monongahela River Room, and the Confluence River Room. And the West End Bridge is all the way to the west of that Confluence River Room. It is one of the most significant gaps in our loop and in our goal to make the entire 15-mile loop accessible. Mostly because getting from the riverfront level to the bridge on both ends really requires traversing these very steep steps. Plus, underneath the bridge is really quite inhospitable on both ends. Parking on the north end, really just sort of gravel and scrub on the south. So this gap is key to several local trails in terms of getting into the West End, getting into Manchester, and connecting to other local trails, but also importantly to other regional trails, including one going all the way to the West Coast. So this is sort of the map that we're talking about in this proposal. The West End community to the left. Can you see my pointer, by the way? Yes, okay, to the left, and then Manchester Chateau to the right. These 2 areas are the Alcosan sites that are being used for their work, to creating this tunnel under the river, and which we are hoping in the future to turn, the leave behind sites into community assets. There are several sort of underutilized sites adjacent to these areas. And then some significant development that's also happening. That Esplanade is happening to the west, actually, of the bridge and Chateau, and also the Get-Go is putting in a gas station, small grocery store here. One of the key aspects of the whole area is that particularly in the West End, the bridge access is located between 2 active rail lines. And so we're really trying to think about how to get people out of the West End, down to the riverfront, and across the West End Bridge and onto the West End Bridge. So in the West End, one of the only locations in the city where we have a run that actually daylights, which we think is pretty great. There are several properties that are currently publicly owned that we're looking at potentially creating into other community assets. But one of the most important pieces is this former railroad tunnel that takes you under the this active rail line here. Other than that, the only ways to get from the west end to the West End Bridge are via the circle, which, as everyone knows, is kind of a nightmare. So the properties that we're looking at on the west end are the Alcosan leave behind. There's a public right-of-way right here that we're potentially utilizing. There's a public piece of property right here, just adjacent to West Carson Street. And then that railroad tunnel. And Gavin, jump in if I'm forgetting anything. So quickly, some photographs. This is looking at the Alcosan site. One of the important things about this access here is that it's one of the only locations where you can actually get to the river on this side of the Ohio. And then some views back to the bridge. And this is sort of the site that we're thinking of attaching to the bridge. Again, Sawmill Run daylights. There are several access points that can potentially be used, and there are some pedestrian connection points that are helpful. Looking at this railroad tunnel, it is pretty beautiful, and it is completely abandoned at this point. We're thinking that this is a perfect way to bring pedestrians and bikes, avoid the West End Circle and across West Carson Street, sorry. So this is the egress. This is where the tunnel comes out as you come under the railroad. So this is West Carson. And this right here is sort of the public owned space that we're thinking we can drop down to river level. In Manchester Chateau, we mentioned the Esplanade development is happening here. We have a significant amount of publicly owned space, including the Alcosan site right here that we're thinking will in the future be a really valuable public asset. And again, some photographs, parking right now. Same, this is actually the trail running right here. And views sort of under the bridge. We considered other methods of bringing people down from the bridge to the river level at this point, but what we're going to show you is really sort of what we've decided makes the most sense engineering wise. So getting back to Manchester, there is this what we're calling the mezzanine level, which is under the bridge. Right here, you can see the bridge structure going overhead, which connects to both sides of the bridge, both east and west. That mezzanine level connects back into Manchester via a long, though accessible trail or walk. And then once you're in Manchester, this is that get-go site. So this actually is the walk that connects to that West End Bridge connection. There are other possible connections through green space right here, back into the neighborhood. So the project goals really are simple. We want to create connections, but we also want to create a destination on both sides of the bridge. So basically where we've landed at this point is to create a pedestrian connection, as we said, through that railroad tunnel, which would cross over West Carson Street to a switchback, which would connect both to the West End Bridge, the walk level, and also down to the riverfront trail level. A second switchback, we're hoping will squeeze in here in this public space and connect again to the West End Bridge level at this point, and also to the riverfront and this future leave behind space. Switchback examples. A really rough sketch of what we're thinking about going over West End Bridge. Sorry, the West Carson Street, exiting from that railroad tunnel. And then what we're also considering for the east side of the bridge, expanding the existing walk. Right now, it's about 3 feet wide, bumping out from the on-ramp to the bridge. So sort of cantilevering over the lower level of West Carson Street to a switchback in this public access right of way here, which would then bring us to the Alcoasand site and Riverfront Trail, future Riverfront Trail. Again, very rough sketch of what we're thinking. In Manchester, we're thinking of a connection from that mezzanine level along the side of the bridge to a switchback right at the Riverfront Trail. We've done a significant amount of engineering studies that, have determined that this is actually the best location for this structure. So somehow, if it's at the level of the bridge or below the level of the bridge, somehow bringing pedestrians from this mezzanine level straight across to come up to the bridge level and or down to the trail.
And actually, let me clarify there that I think we determined that was a viable alternative for this structure,
Yes.
though I think we would consider one that might look more closely at coming from that mezzanine area if it would provide considerable cost savings. I think we were interested in keeping the ramp near the trail itself for sort of biking accessibility purposes, but that wouldn't be absolutely necessary.
Correct. So on the West End Bridge, we'll just give a very brief overview of that since that is sort of out of the scope of this project, but there are 4 spans on the bridge. Again, we're thinking of connecting at this point, not necessarily directly to the bridge, but abutting the bridge. And then again, at span number 1, connecting to this pedestrian connection here. On the bridge itself, we're thinking of widening the walk. This is something that's being studied right now, whether the bridge can handle the loads. We've decided that even if it's determined that the bridge can't, it's worth having these switchbacks so that people can get up and across the bridge. But ideally, we would like to expand by about 7 feet and potentially create these overlooks that wrap around the bridge. What are these called? Structures. So that people can rest, take a look back at the city, because it really is one of the best views that we've got of downtown Pittsburgh. Also, making the bridge more decorative. How do we celebrate this bridge? Is it light art? Some of the engineering studies that we've done, we're looking at that expansion to see how we can push that out. This was determined that we can do that expansion with the same load of the infrastructure. Really, the issue is once we get many people on that bridge at July 4th looking at the fireworks, can the bridge handle that? So traffic improvements will be a significant part of this. The connection from the West End to the railroad tunnel will be a little bit tricky. There is an intersection here with, I believe, a stop sign that people can cross, but getting from this location to the entrance to the railroad tunnel, it's a steep hill, so we're going to have to figure out some connection there. The other possibility that we're thinking about is coming through this space here, which is public, and crossing the road here. What is the road's name again? What is this road?
Steuben Street.
Steuben, thank you. Crossing Steuben at this point, but as I'm sure everyone knows, as you're coming around this corner, that's a really tight, kind of scary place to have people crossing. So are there, lighting changes that can be made that will make that possible? We don't know. That's part of the study that we're hoping to hear from you guys. We are also not planning to eliminate the pedestrian crossings in the West End Circle. We're really trying to encourage people to use this new crossover, but the crossing here, the current crossing situation for pedestrians and bicyclists is not ideal. So that would be something that we're also thinking about looking at. And then on this side of the bridge, basically you are crossing the off-ramp from Route 65. And so making that a much more hospitable experience for pedestrians and bicyclists. And then also as they come into Manchester, this intersection is, pretty congested. So how can we make that a more pleasant experience? So I'm not going to go through all of the sort of elevation changes, but they are significant, as I'm sure you could tell from looking through the RFP, and the distances between where we're proposing switchbacks are fairly significant. So from 752 to 731, we're going to have to, we're going to have to manage clearances on the road, making sure that, that works for trucks, et cetera, which might require that this expanded walk ramps up at some point. And then getting from, 752, oopsie, sorry, to 720. So significant distance in a tight space. So these are the photographs that we included. This is looking back at the pedestrian connection from through the West End Circle on the eastern side of the West End Bridge. Standing at the top of the steps, which we're assuming would be approximately the connection location for the expanded walk headed east, with the the walk skirting this side of the infrastructure and possibly rising up to come across West Carson Street. Again, the existing pedestrian access, which is rough. And then this is this public space that we're thinking of dropping down and having the switchback in this space. We included this photograph to show that there's significant infrastructure there that will have to be negotiated. We don't expect that anything is going to have to be relocated, but we're hoping not, at least. But there are significant utilities that will need to be considered. Again, this railroad tunnel, which is sort of this beautiful way to come out and view the city. Again, the egress here from that, and you can sort of see the elevation above West Carson Street. We've done some very preliminary studies and think that it's possible to come across, whether we have to sort of take this turn to come further northwest on West Carson Street to get the critical elevation remains to be seen. And then this is the view from the end of the tunnel, looking back at the site on the other side of West Carson Street, where we would drop down with the switchback, and a view towards that landing spot. In Manchester, again, the connection, the pedestrian connection to this long but accessible enclosed space. The stairs down to trail level from the bridge, from actually mezzanine, not even the bridge. You'd have to, here's the mezzanine level, you'd have to take steps up to get to the bridge level from Riverfront. Looking back at the location for that, the proposed location in this proposal, as Gavin said, not finalized, but where we're thinking at this point, a connection just adjacent to this pier. And then looking back towards that site from the sort of back towards Manchester. So I don't know if anyone has any questions about this. I'll just go back to the stop and I'll stop sharing. If you do, please feel free to unmute, or you can put a question in chat.
David from here. I just wanted to comment. Have you looked at the plans of the bridge that they dismantled coming from the old railroad bridge going across West Carson? That kind of left in the direction of the bridge going northwest, and it gracefully turned even more west going over Carson, and then then it paralleled Carson, slowly going down in one fell swoop with no switchback. I don't know if they did that to just give it more clearance over Carson or what, but it would require, a lot more land going further west for
Yeah.
dropping.
We haven't looked at that, but we really should, and we'll make sure we have that as a package available to the team once they're selected. So thanks for that, David. And if you have any materials on that, please pass them our way.
Okay, thank you. I don't. I'll look for the drawings. Thank you.
There must be some questions. I don't think it's that straightforward.
It's straightforward. I mean, I've even thought, if leaving the west end, if you could get into that no man's land tunnel under Steuben up to the left, or the what do you call it, the south of the railroad trestle. It's a challenging area. I think it's the only way to get over, but yeah.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and one thing I guess we should be clear about is, we expect as a part of the alternatives analysis that we look deeply at sort of how those connections to the west end and to Manchester are facilitated. I think there's some flexibility in how far we take the designs of new intersections or traffic signals and things, right? The focus is really on those three structures, but we want to make sure that they're aligning with a context that's going to make sense in the long term, even if we can't get to construction documents for every aspect of the system.
Thank you for this presentation. It's great to see just how far this work has come along in a relatively short amount of time. I'm curious about, on the west end side of the bridge, there are two switchbacks there. Which trail to the east or to the west is more likely to happen first? And thinking about phasing, which switchback do you think is a higher priority?
I would assume that the switchback connected to the rail tunnel would be a higher priority. I think that the community desperately wants that connection. I think they feel very trapped up in there, and it would be really a real benefit to the community to open that up.
Yeah, I think that's right. It also accommodates, if that one structure was built, it would technically provide accessibility to both riverfronts, though it would be circuitous. And David, I think you were just about to chime in and say the same.
Yeah, I was going to say, because remember, it's not just the West End Community Group; it's the 8 to 13 other communities behind us. And we are connecting to the seldom seen trail and everything, and that's a disenfranchisement of many tens of thousands of residents. But that's my only comment. Thanks.
Good afternoon. This is Nikki Jacobs. I have a question about how much public involvement do you expect as part of the proposal or this effort?
I think that there will be a minimum amount. I believe River Life is planning to sort of take on the broader engagement effort with the community. However, we will need the consultant to help prepare graphics, documents for that, presentations potentially. But I think that River Life can take on the actual meetings and the sort of heavy lifting on that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Adele Beeves with Kinley Horn. I'd like to know, just on one of the exhibits you had referenced, the vacant rail tunnel under Norfolk Southern Rail is going to be dedicated as a pedestrian. Do you guys have legwork in place to have that dedication occur? Is that going to be part of what you want the consultant team to work on and work with Norfolk Southern directly?
So yeah, so the important piece of note for that railroad tunnel is that corridor, the entire railroad corridor is owned by PennDOT, and they went through a lengthy process to assure that ownership through court, et cetera. Now, I am not expert enough to understand, air and underground rights that Norfolk Southern may entertain and that we have to work with. But it's my understanding that PennDOT has the easement through that tunnel, and we're working with them now with a number of other community stakeholders to contemplate the transfer of that entire rail corridor to a long-term owner with interest in pedestrian access.
Thanks.
While others may be thinking of questions, I just want to, sort of emphasize what Maria shared earlier, which is that, these access structures are really critical pieces of infrastructure. They're also meant to be sort of part of and enhance other portions of public space that we hope to develop along the riverfront here. So Alcosan's sites for their tunnel will be active construction zones for the next 5 to 10 years. But after that, they really will be sort of blank slates. And it's our hope that they become opportunities for considerable investment in open space around the bridge. So, we hope that these ramp structures, though we're not going to be doing the design of that public space concurrently, unless we find funding rather quickly, we hope that it will be thoughtful about how they engage with that future public space as well.
Greg Sorminair from Gannett Fleming. Thanks for that input on that, Gavin, too. Which creates a question on just if you could elaborate on the schedule a little bit. There seems to be some open-end items, just as you had mentioned there, and trying to get a handle on where some conversation with priorities, but how that impacts even the schedule as well, and how you'd like to, what's the end game and what River Life would like to see.
Yeah, it's a really important question, and one thing that's a pretty stringent requirement for us is that these funds, the $2 million we marked in the proposal for this work, must be spent by the end of 2024. So we've allowed a little bit of cushion. We said 16 months. That gives us 2 months on the back end, but that's not a lot of time for this sort of work, right? So there may be other efforts, part of this work, where we identify in the alternatives phase, like improvements to adjacent intersections, or the ground plane improvements at those public parks that can extend beyond that and that are part of a separate budget. But in terms of the construction documents, or as far as we can get toward construction documents for these 3 access structures, that has to be done by the end of 2024. That really lines us up. We're hoping to work with PennDOT and have had some early hopeful conversations with them about this actually being included in a package for federal funding to restore the bridge, because they're seeking to restore it. It's on a tip for 2028. So we really want this to be ready and delivered to them in advance of that work, so that it's part of that overall construction package.
I believe we had a question in the chat. Considering the switchback location on the northeast side of the West End Bridge, have you looked at the proximity of the existing buildings, extensive underground utilities, and the adjacent roadway in terms of space available? The one building on the Alcoasand site is coming down. So that is not going to be a consideration in terms of underground utilities. As much as we can, we don't have a survey of that site, so we know approximate locations for where drop shafts and the leave behind infrastructure is going to be for Alcoasand, but we don't necessarily know where all of the utilities are located on any of these sites. So
Yeah, I will say though that a fair amount of legwork should be done by Alcoasand already for that work. We do have an MOU with Alcoasand to co-design at least the west end side, and are working toward an MOU for the northeast side as well. So because of all the work that they're doing there, they're going to have pretty significant maps of underground utilities, and we will work in lockstep with them in order to make sure that we're placing these structures appropriately. That'll be the sort of significant portion of early work for both Alcoasand site projects. The other side, the west end side, which is on PennDOT property, may be less involved there, but those two are both going to require significant coordination with Alcoasand.
is there any potential to extend the deadline for submission given the complexity of the proposal and proximity to Memorial Day weekend?
Right. So we talked about this. We're nervous about the timeline and the need to spend these funds by the end of 2024. But if I could get like a show of virtual hands or other feelings that this is not going to be something that you can submit before or for the 30th, then we'll consider it. But just want to acknowledge that eats into our overall timeline, and it's going to be pretty tight at this point. Others who would be seeking an extension, raise your hands now or forever hold your peace. No.
One thumbs up, it looks like.
Okay, well, that being the case, we will consider it. Oh, David, for those who are considering submitting a proposal, we want to see if there are others who would like an extension for submission. It is something we are reticent to provide given the overall timeline, but if it feels important, and if we don't want proposals that are lacking in quality. So if it is important to a group of you that we extend that deadline, then we would be willing to do so. But I have not seen other hands other than Craig. Well, you
Nope.
have till the 17th to let us know if you too think that the proposal should be extended. If not, we may stick with the deadline, and Ashley, best of luck, but we'll let you know for sure on the 17th.
Should we go through the other questions that we received earlier? Gavin?
That's okay. I think we can, any
Okay.
questions we've received via email, we will answer on the 17th. Any questions here will also be reiterated then, including any remaining questions that people may have. All right. Well, we don't need to keep anybody any longer than we have to. So thanks again for your time today. Any follow-up questions that you may have, please get them in to us by the 17th, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can after that.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Have a great day.
Good day.